come. You play with fire and burn.
Is the hardest one to overcome, for you fear only yourself.
A friend of mine once told me, anybody can restore a car, but it takes real balls to chop one up. And that's what's going on here. This is a 1971 El Camino SS. Converting the suspension to a complete C4 setup, it's going to have a 6-liter LS swap and a full roll cage, ready for battle. This is going to be a drift car, a track car, autocross, road racing, lapping, time attack. I'm going to make it versatile, but primarily it's going to be a drift car. So I've really been thinking about building something like this for a long time. I've always wanted to make a really crazy muscle car into a really crazy track car. When I go to a car show, the first car I go to see is anything that's there with a roll cage. I like cars that are meant to be driven. So a project like this, I had to get out of my own way. I had to stop being afraid of it. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing. I've never done this before, and I'm not sure if I have the skills to do it. But I think it's something that you just can't be afraid of. It's something that you gotta go ahead and do and jump into it, and everything just kind of works itself out as long as you stay focused and don't get discouraged and keep going. I don't have the skill, I don't have the knowledge or the education to be doing this, but I have done my homework and my research the best that I can. In a sense, this car is like the practice car, because me and all my friends, we're gonna come together and we're gonna work on this together, and we're gonna learn new skills along the way. We're gonna become better welders and fabricators. Building a project like this, when we're finished, we'll know that we're capable of doing this and so much more, because the next one's gonna be that much better. So this one is really a blank canvas. It's a piece of art, and it kind of showcases what we can do. And the fun part is that it's a race car. It's a track car, it's a party car, and it's just loud and crazy and chaotic. So far, there's nothing to fear, but we haven't started chopping it up yet. We're simply taking it apart, and that's the fun part. Pulling off the original stock suspension from the 71 El Camino was much more challenging than expected. The bolts were all seized solid, nothing was turning, nothing was loose. The suspension wouldn't even compress under weight. Because this old school stock suspension is so heavy and everything is all seized up, most of it was getting chopped off, pulled off and torn apart. The suspension on this truck weighs a ton compared to what I have in mind for it. Now we're at the point of no return. This is where I have to start chopping it up. I had to weld a cross piece in the front to make sure everything stayed solid and stayed lined up and true. After welding that in, it's time to get into cutting the subframe. I'll be honest, I was a little worried about this, if there was any kind of tension on the metal or the frame at all. Maybe it had been hit or twisted a little bit. So when it cut, I was worried it was gonna kick. But it cut off nice and smooth. Went through a few grinder wheels, but it came off nice. Once it was out, I just had to grind it up nice and clean and see if I could fit the new Corvette suspension in between the frame rails. The measurements say that it should work out, but you never know until you try it. To put the C4 Corvette suspension inside this El Camino frame, I had to take off the top A-arms, pull the original piece of frame out of there that when this was purchased off a Corvette, which was I assumed to be scrapped, the frame was just simply cut out. So I had to get rid of the original Corvette frame rails and get it ready to be transplanted into the El Camino. So what I'm working with here is 1984 to 87 Corvette suspension, fitting it into a 1971 Chevy El Camino chassis, out with the old and in with the new.
In my veins, fresh brain, wet dreams and piss stains. 56K got me watching pics of porn frames. Explain pain, mundane games and fame. I can feel the influence, but I know how to react. If I make the wrong choice, what could be the impact? Should I retract to keep my course on track, or succumb to all the forces that try to detract? Should I do right, cause I'm a only son? A big part of me says fuck it and run.
Now to test fit it again and see how much room I have to work with. By test fitting it, I found out that I need to lift it up higher inside the frame. You can see that the frame on the inside, lower portion, needs to be brought out to give more room in between the frame rails. This Corvette subframe has a V-taper, which holds the top A-arms connected to the subframe. So I have to make that sit nice and snug and as low as possible on the chassis in order to be able to mount all the brackets and bolts in the proper position and gain the proper angles. To achieve this, I had to go in a ½ inch on each side of the frame rail. So I simply cut slices down, cut the bottom off flush, and use the hammer to knock it in. Because it was only a ½ inch, partially I could weld over and bridge the weld, but the little pieces after that were simply cut out of stock metal that I had left around and put in place and welded. Welding everything together melts all the metal. It's almost as solid as one piece. Measuring is a very important thing. I had to measure everything 5 times over just to make sure. Made sure everything was squared off, everything was equal distances from each other, made sure it was centered, made sure it was aligned with the frame. Now that I have room on the inside of the frame rails, it's time to work on the outside, which is a little scary because those spring cups are massive. Cutting those off and making the pieces I need is cutting off a huge section of the stock frame. I was worried that it would get a little too weak and start to bend. But after cutting it out, it held together nicely. Everything is still straight and still true. I don't feel like I have to worry about this too much right now. It was time to rebuild everything back up. So I had some flat stock. Unfortunately, I didn't have a big enough piece to do that entire side of the rail in one shot. But by using the flat stock, the angles lined up, I welded them together, cut my pieces appropriately, put it all together as one big piece. So in the end, it worked out. It was just a little more work than I needed to do. It was a little difficult to get all the curves, but with the small pieces of this flat stock, clamping it down using the hammer, molding, fitting, everything worked out. You just have to stay on it, have patience, and expect to be doing it for twice as long as you initially thought. Then you'll be okay.